Hey everybody, we're here with the band show talking to my friend, Lita Judge. Say hi, Lita.
Hi.
Hey. Now, Lita, we want to know stuff about you. So, first of all, where are you from?
I live in New Hampshire. I live out in the woods.
And do you love living in the woods of New
I
Hampshire?
love living in the woods. I look out my window and I see bears and deer and fox crawl across the yard. And as an author who writes a lot about nature, it's a perfect place for me to live. It's a little cold, though.
You live by bears? Is that scary?
Not really, although they do take the sides of the house off, the boards off the side of the house, and they flip the flagstones on our pavement. So they're like high maintenance bears.
You are an author, is that correct?
Yes, author and illustrator.
Excellent. And so, how early did you get started with your writing and illustrating?
Well, my first book was about a cat and a bat and a hat. And I'm pretty sure those are the 3 words I could spell because I was about 4 years old.
Huh?
But I've always been writing and drawing, and I didn't get published until I was much older in life because I was a geologist first. But I've always loved creating stories.
Do you ever incorporate geology into your writing?
Oh yeah, I've written several books about dinosaurs and a lot of books about nature, and a lot of the things I learned as a geologist are going into my work now.
Wow, how interesting. Jeez Louise. So when you were younger and you were starting writing and illustrating, did you have anybody that encouraged you and helped you along?
I lived in a really remote place. I was actually born on an island in Alaska, and
Whoa.
My family was the only family that lived on the island. So art for me was something I did to entertain myself. I didn't have a lot of people saying like you could grow up and become an artist. So it took me a long time. But I think it also kind of helped me in a way because I just did it because I totally loved it. And it wasn't until I met my husband and he took me to my very first art museum, and we walked in and I just was blown away. And he was the one who said, you really should do this. You're always drawing, you're always writing stories. Why don't you do this for a living? So I really give him a lot of credit for supporting me.
Wow, what a wonderful companion you have.
Yeah.
That's great. Now I want to talk about your books. Now, first of all, you've got a series of books about a red hat. Is that right?
Yes, I do. A little child that lives in the woods wears a red hat, and at one point the creatures kind of steal her sled, and then they steal her hat, and a lot of hilarity ensues. And it's really a book that was kind of inspired by my own childhood because I lived on an island in Alaska by myself and kind of made up stories in my mind to entertain myself. And so that story kind of reflects, what was kind of going through my head as a youngster.
Wow. And now I have a question for you. You make red hats as well, is that right?
I do, yes.
Have you made a red hat for all of your animals?
I have. I have actually
Even
made
the parrot?
several for my parrot, and she wears it. There's a video on my website where she's putting her hat on. I don't know if she enjoys it, but she tolerates it.
Wait, she puts her own hat on?
Yes. I mean, everybody in this family has to work. We make our living writing children's books, and the kitties and the parrot, they're models, they're muses, and they have to help promote the book if I write a book about them, so everybody pitches in.
Put on your hats, guys.
That's right.
We got a commercial to do. That's awesome. Now you have a new book, and this is different than your Red Hat series, right?
Yeah, this is a huge departure. It's a book about Mary Shelley, who wrote Frankenstein, and a lot of people have heard of Frankenstein. I mean, everybody's heard of Frankenstein, but so few people know that Frankenstein was actually written by a teenage girl. And not only was she a teenager, she was a runaway. Her father cast her out of her home because she fell in love with a married man, and she was pregnant, and she lived in a time when women weren't allowed to have an education and they weren't allowed to put their names on her books. She wrote this book anonymously, and yet she changed the course of literature. Her book is still one of the most read books of all time. She was the first person to write a science fiction novel, and nobody's really written a book about her for young kids, and I really felt like this story needs to be told. She's a remarkable young woman. A young girl, she was sent away from home, and here's the illustration of the book. Ooh. She was sent away from home when she was 13, so she was a really remarkable woman. This poem is called Do Not Return, and it's right after she's been put on this ship to go to a foreign country to live with a family she's never met. It says, do not return. Early summer in a time of war, when the sea is a battleground and ships are weapons, I find myself on the deck of the Augustenberg, heading for Scotland. Little separates me from the mail and cargo in the ship's hold. I am like a letter stamped do not return, being delivered to a future I cannot know. I try to keep the shoreline in sight, as if this will prevent the wind driving the sails, but gradually the land recedes into a thin line and then is swallowed completely by bruise-colored clouds. I am left to feel completely alone.
Wow. And am I right in did she write this on a dare?
You know, that's the lore, and that's part of why I wrote the book, is everybody that I talked to when I was writing the book took me 6 years. And during that time, I would ask, what do you know about Mary Shelley? And the one thing people would say was, wasn't it a dare to write a ghost story by a guy, Lord Byron?
Lord Byron, right.
And it enraged me because it's like, here's this an amazing young woman, and if you read the book, you'll see that there's so many parallels in her life that caused her to write this book. And yet the thing that has kind of distilled through the ages is that a guy, a male author, dared her to write this story. And this story is so much more than a dare. And it's also so much more than a ghost story. So that's why I wrote the book, was to kind of like break down the myth and tell the real truth of this young woman.
Wow, that's excellent. Wow, well, thank you very much for telling the world and telling the kids about this wonderful author.
Thank you.
Now, I don't know a lot about Mary Shelley. Did she write other books besides Frankenstein?
She did. You know, none of them took off like Frankenstein, but she wrote several books afterwards. Also, she eventually married the poet Percy Shelley, but Percy died at a very, very young age, and she spent her life making sure that he got published, and he ended up being he's considered one of the top 6 poets of all time, and so she is credited for that. But at the time, she was this young unmarried woman with a child. She couldn't get married because her reputation was ruined for having run away. And so she wrote travel journals, she wrote educational pamphlets, she was one of the first people to write books for children. She did everything she could do to survive as a young woman writing in a time when she couldn't put her name on her books. Yes?
Have you ever met a dinosaur?
I have.
What?
I've met lots of dinosaurs.
Like real dinosaurs?
Real dinosaurs.
Oh my goodness.
When
All right,
I
hold on
was
a
a
second. Let me sit
kid,
down for this.
I read dinosaur books like a lot of kids who love dinosaurs, only I love them so much I started writing letters to museums asking if I could work on a dinosaur dig. And I wrote so many letters. I wrote like hundreds of letters. And finally, when I was 14, a museum called and they said, well, we can see it might be easier just to say yes. Because I was writing like 3 letters a day asking if I could work on a dinosaur. So
Persistence.
they let me work on a dinosaur dig, and I had so much fun. There was, obviously no kids on the dig, but there were people from all over the world working on it. It was up in Canada, and I had so much fun. I went every summer all through high school and all through college, and that's why I became a geologist before I became a writer.
So what was the coolest dinosaur bone you ever found?
Oh, Tyrannosaurus.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.